Hello and welcome to the CX Files for May 7th, 2026. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal, but waiting for CX Outsourcers, which is going to kick off in just under 2 weeks, Mark. I cannot believe that we will be assembling the global BPO ecosystem in Ottawa, my neck of the woods, just right to the west of Montreal in just a few days.
That's awesome. It's great. Great news. I really wish I was going up to Canada to see you up there, but it seems that all of the air tickets from South America going anywhere have more than doubled recently. So
Yeah.
it's a bit difficult at the moment.
It is a bit difficult, and for an industry like ours, it's pushing the costs up significantly. Like I saw a few days ago that I think Lufthansa announced that they're canceling 20,000 flights this summer. I mean, number one, that volume of flights is just incredible. But
Mm.
number two, if it's due to fuel costs and the inability of people to buy plane tickets, it's speaking to a real systematic problem or a structural issue that the CX space is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, yeah. Well, right now in the United States, Spirit is looking for a government bailout to avoid going under completely, and they've been bankrupt twice in the last 2 years. So it, it,
Yeah.
it looks like we may be losing a major budget carrier in the US. So things are tough out there.
They are tough. I'm always a believer that there needs to be every now and again a shakeout in any industry, but at the same time, you don't want to see it happen on the back of factors that just can't be controlled. But I guess that's the world we're dealing in right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, on to more positive things. Mark, this is one of your interviews. Now, who were you chatting with this week?
I was talking to Andrew Hall. I think that we had him as a guest a long time ago when he
Yeah.
was at Quantumite. But in the last year, I guess, or last half a year or so, he's formed a new company called Ethenta, which is it's it's got some products that are focused on making agentic AI more of a reality. Because I guess the problem is that for a lot of us, we hear about all the AI horror stories. We hear
Hmm.
about the difficulties in getting your data to work, and I think that what Andrew's system is really trying to do is combine the data that you have in your organization with stuff like interviews. So interviewing people at the front line, finding out what's wrong with their job, how could they do their job better, this kind of thing, and then kind of bundling all this information together to try and create better workflows. And this is applicable to the sort of CX environment as well, because you can apply the same sort of rules to customer workflows and reducing friction, and things like root cause analysis. Why are people calling us in the first place? Why can't we fix that problem before they need to call? So I think it's a sort of an interesting look at a topic that often people today kind of throw up their hands and say, I've just had enough of this AI stuff. But I think it's a sort of acceptance that if we are going to make it work, then it needs a combination of data plus human insight into how a business really works.
It's an interesting one because we are just, as you know, we've just finished up and are releasing the 2026 CX Technology and Global Services Survey, which sounded the views of 850 enterprise buyers. And one of the things that came through was the fact that the buying community, the captive community, have a lot of confusion around agentic AI. And I was chatting with a friend of mine not long ago, and she was saying to me the problem is that you ask 10 different people in technology what agentic AI means, and you're going to get 10 different answers. There needs to be some type of a rationalization or almost a level of acceptance about what we're talking about when this technology is being discussed. And with any luck, Andrew can shed some light on sort of where the technology is going, what it means, and where the applicability is.
Yeah, absolutely. And instead of us just sort of waffling on about AI definitions, why don't we just go straight to the interview and listen to Andrew describe it?
Great idea.
Andrew, it's great to get you on the podcast. We've had loads of technical trouble just now, so it's good that it's actually working now. first, could you introduce the company and then Dream, which is the product that you're offering? Is it? I mean, I took a look at the website, and and I've got loads of questions for you as well. But maybe it's good if you could sort of explain: is it a platform, a decision engine, or a methodology, or something that you would say that's entirely new? Then.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for having me on, Mark. So I started Ethenta a few months ago now, after leaving Quantonite. Obviously, part of our focus on Quantonite was very much around how to introduce AI, and latterly, as soon as it came out, more the agentic flavor of AI across businesses to look at how people and AI could come together collectively. Being an outsourcer, we clearly had a lot of people interest as well. So, for some time, I've been looking very much at the correlation between AI and people, and how culture and organization and automation should really be stepped up in companies and be made effective, rather than the failures that we see around, and the gravestones that keep coming up on LinkedIn every so often of things that have failed. So when I left the business, I started Ethenta. At the time, it was very much geared around, I want to run an AI business, and I think I've got some credibility within that space, having done what I did in Quantonite, and previous to that as well. And I started to notice that one of the biggest things around implementation of AI wasn't the AI technology itself. There's a massive lack of knowledge and understanding about what it is, especially agentic. But it was actually the organizational noise that was going on that was stopping people from seeing clearly what they wanted to achieve with it. And so I created this idea of Dream, which is initially, it started off as a way to allow people to step out of the noise. And when I say noise, I mean internal noise, with transformations and things going wrong, and too many conflicting interests and so forth, but also externally, with too many vendors coming in and trying to suggest their products could solve the world, when the reality was that most of them probably wouldn't. 85% of them claim to be agentic and are not agentic, and so forth and so on. So it was really around, what if we could create a methodology that would allow an organization to take some time out, and to say, what if we were to get creative about our business and think about it in terms of what we ideally would like it to be, and not have any constraints within the business. So I created this concept of Dream, which stands for Discovery, Reimagine, Educate, Apply, and Mobilize. And initially, it was designed very much around the AI space, as a way to capture the business viewpoint at a moment in time, so a snapshot, if you like, and then to workshop with those companies to say, let's have a reimagine session. The reimagine session is, what if there was no noise? What if there were no constraints? What if there was no anything in the way of you achieving your goal? What would that goal be? And actually, it's quite an incredible session to do, because you start to see people. It takes about an hour for people to get into this, because they have to get rid of all the noise. But once the noise is gone, the workshop runs for a day, and people start to get into the idea of actually. And I say, the analogy is, if you go to an old house and you look at a really old, decrepit house, and you say, what would that look like were you to completely redesign it? And some people can go in and they can reimagine it, and other people can go in and they want to walk away quickly. And it's the same in business. There are people in business who go to a business every day and look at it and say, it's in such a mess, I can do nothing with it. And then you'll get people that go into a business and say, I can see something beautiful here. We just have to make it turn out to what we want it to be. And so Dream was that. Dream was, let's start with the reimagination. Let's say we understand where you are today. Now forget that. Put a pound coin in the table, a pound pot in the table, and every time you say technology or you say constraint for the next 3 hours, you put a pound in the pot. And we have a session where people just get creative. And the first thing you find is that most businesses are really simple. I want to sell a product to someone, or I want to get some care into someone and support them, a patient and a practitioner together. And we make them manifestly complicated by years of overworking on processes and so forth. And that's what organizations then struggle to get out of. And housing associations is another one. Actually, the concept, I've got a homeless person who needs a house. It's not a hard concept, right? And yet we make it incredibly hard. And so we run a session where we get rid of all the noise. Everyone gets creative, those that can. Some people can't, they struggle with that because that's not their mindset. But you come out with a vision at the end of that period of time. And then we say, well, but the reality is we have constraints. So let's go right to left and say, well, let's build those constraints back in and see if we can do anything about them. So we work from the vision back into where the business is today, working through the constraints that are going to get in our way. And if we can deal with them, we do. And we deal with them through various different techniques and technologies or partners or whatever it is that we've got. And then when you get back to where you are today, you go left to right. That says, I know where I want to be. I know the constraints. Now we're going to go left to right, build the plan, and we create the output model and the phasing approach. And then in some cases, they'll say, can you draw our system on the board? What does this system look like? Or what does their processes do? How do we go? And then we'll have a creative session around the apply. And for one or two clients, they then ask us if we can then mobilize and actually build it, which is great. So that's Dream is a methodology, but I felt that I wanted a way to capture it. It's a lot of data to capture in a session. And so I created an agentic tool that would allow me to have what I call it a hemisphere. But think of it as a semicircle. And for each of these workshops, you have different lenses, and a lens could be, if it's in a contact center for an airline, you've got different lenses to a contact center in a retail, or if it's a revenue growth opportunity, or it's a compliance review, whatever it is, or I've got one coming up for finance to do a finance review, and they have different lenses. And I put those lenses around the hemisphere. And then when we have the workshop, you see them being populated. So as people are speaking things to do with a particular lens, so it could be regulatory, customer, technology, whatever, people, you see those dots arrive, and they're not utterances, they're not chunks. It's not we won or the customer is, it's the customer. The customer is struggling because our regulatory framework is so complex due to the technologies we have. Now, in me making that statement, as I started that, it started with customer, and then it went to technology, a regulatory, and then it ended up on technology. And that synthesis, that capture of the context is quite complicated. So I wanted to create a way to capture the context of the conversation. And at the end of a 5-hour workshop, you might have 1,000, 1,200 different utterances, sentences that are said, that you can then start to synthesize together and say, well, what does that mean? What do we put together? What can we cross-reference with each other? And the system, different to a lot of other systems where when you've got the data points, it creates a dashboard for you as a business. What this is doing is actually saying, so what? What do we do with that? How do we turn that into something meaningful? And so the idea is then that you start to create outputs from the data. Now, the data for the workshop is one context, is one lens. The data from the discovery, which is the bit that happens before the workshop, allows us to capture one-to-one interviews through an agentic-led conversation online. And that's a 15-minute, 20-minute conversation that the person has with an agentic agent. At the end, they get a PDF, and it captures the knowledge of that person. How do they think about the organization? So I've got that lens. Now I've got the discovery workshop as well. And then I take historical data. Everyone's got historical data. So we capture, if it's contact center, we take that. If it's finance, we take whatever it is, and we add that to the knowledge. And then you have customer lens. Well, we'll take the customer lens in as well. And the strength and the power of agentic when it's done right. And I have about 8 or 9 different agentic agents working together in this tool, is that when they do it, they start to correlate in ways that you and I can't do. They capture ways and links of data in a way that is absolutely sublime. And so at the end of this session, I end up with a sphere. And at the top of the sphere, you have enablers, which are in green. At the bottom, you have all the challenges and the constraints of an organization. And in the middle, you have the enablers and the transformations. And the aim is that if you have challenges that are orphans, in other words, there's no connection to something in the middle around enablers, then you have a problem, because you're not doing anything with the challenges and the constraints. You're ignoring them. But if the more you can show those links, then the more likely you are to be a transforming organization. Equally downwards, if you've got enablers and vision, or vision statements that you've got, but you're not doing anything about them, why not? And so the workshop brings out the vision statements, it highlights the constraints, it looks at the enablers, and then it formats a way forward that is not only based on empirical data, customer data, but it's also based on a real snapshot. I call it the corporate psyche. of how people in your organization are thinking and behaving, puts all that together, creates the deltas and a number of different psychology-based type flows, like COMBI type flows that come out of this, and a number of different ways of reading data, friction points, so executive friction points against the way that executive think compared to operations, compared to like agents at a phone, for example. And it allows you to then look and say, well, actually, the way I think my organization was working, it clearly isn't. And then it has a way forward to do something about it.
Okay, and so that's, I mean, if I was asking, like, what is the actual output then? What is the actionable output? It's that's effectively what you were just talking about then. Yeah, this
Yeah,
you get a visualization of the entire enterprise.
Yeah, it's you get a, I mean, the total output is around 20 or 30 pages of the PDF, with graphs and tables and all sorts of things on it. But it effectively captures it's a decision intelligence tool. It very much decision intelligence, but it's not a dashboard that just sits on your desk. It can be, but the goal is that it's real time. So it's capturing your organizational psyche and help you to make decisions. And so you'll get very practical decisions out of it, like the one I've just completed. It's a 3-phase output that says phase 1 is this for 6 months, then you've got a 3-month phase 2, and then a so forth. And then it has a Gantt chart with all of the pricing and assumptions and break evens and ROIs, etc.
Mm. And so if you were applying this to an organization that uses a contact center, for example, then and you have all that kind of huge volumes of customer data, the voice recordings, CRM notes, complaint logs. How do you take all that kind of fragmented data then? I mean, this is voice of the customer data, essentially. And how do you create something that the executive team can actually use then?
So each piece of data gets broken down. Sorry, I should have said beyond the workshops, we also have field data. So we'll go and sit at desks you have a QR code within the platform. You put it onto your phone. You can go to a desk and you can record an agent's desk, for example. So you capture that. So what you start to capture is a cohort breakdown of cohorts effectively within the organization. And once you've got all of that data, each set of data is then synthesized on its own first. So you start to capture the essence of the discovery, for example, and then you capture the essence of the customer. And so it'll do some various different analysis, and then it will start to cross-reference them. The customer data, it will capture pretty much the way that an organization thinks about capturing customer data. It will do the same. It will analyze the customer data, find correlations. But then what it will do is to say, does the customer data, is the output from the people side of the organization equal to or different to the way that customers are perceiving the organization? And that's one of the key differences here, is that we're doing all of that cross-linking within the agentic model. And so we have different agentic agents trained on different things. You'll have one that's trained on customer output and reading what goes on in a contact center, reading a quality report and so forth. And then you'll have other agentic agents that are skilled on the discovery and asking the right questions during the workshops.
And so, I mean, I'm sort of thinking then, if I was a listener, and I'm responsible for a CX environment, I've probably already got dashboards that are showing me what's going on in the organization. What is it that's different then about having this agentic approach?
It's number one. It's not a dashboard. It's a workshop that we're trying to work with the organization. It can be left as a dashboard, but the goal of it is not to be a dashboard. If you create a corporate psyche, if I was to show you on here the corporate psyche, it's quite an interesting lens into the way that a company thinks that I've never seen before. There are thousands of data points and links that are made between different data points that an organization just doesn't see. And I think part of the problem for organizations today is that they do have all this noise. And actually, what does it all mean, and how do you cut through it? And so, there are things that some organizations have in terms of being able to look at data today that give them a certain lens within the organization that isn't necessarily the entirety of what's going on. what I try to do within this is to say, well, what if we could create something that could allow us to see everything that's important in order to be able to start to think about the organization in an intelligent way. And so, you've got lots of tools in the market like Qualtrics and Medallia and InMoment and Forster and those kind of organizations, and they're very good at data collection and channel ingestion. They'll look at sentiment, they'll present dashboards, but they don't do cross-domain synthesis. They don't do the psyche map to help you read how your organization is behaving. They don't do structured kind of facilitated capture in the way that the workshop happens. And all of this output starts to give you quite an interesting lens into your organization that I don't think other companies are doing in quite the same way at the moment. And that's essentially it. So, you have the dashboards. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those dashboards, but they don't correlate together the complexity of the data.
So if someone's coming at this, and they're fairly new to the idea of agentic, I mean, would one way of explaining it then be that it's almost like having a team of automated management consultants looking at the organization constantly and suggesting change then?
It can. I mean, you say constantly. It can be, or it can be once and done. It can be an envisioning to say, well, for example, how do I adopt AI into my business today? I don't know how to do that. So how you set that workshop up is the key. So we've got a contact center for an airline that we're looking at the moment, and they've got all sorts of challenges within the airline that are not to do with AI at the moment. But they can't answer the calls quick enough. They can't get through the calls and analyze them and understand what's going on. So that's that's the lens going into the workshop. And what the agentic is able to do is to correlate and synthesize and analyze the data based on the inputs it's getting. In other words, if my workshop is to find the best way to use AI, everything it does directs towards that end goal. If it's to find out why I can't answer calls quick enough in a contact center, everything in the workshop directs towards that. And the agentic are like a series of consultants sitting in the room that are mature and capable, and they're looking and saying, am I capturing all of the data I need to be able to apply this analysis? And if not, it will tell you the data you need to capture that you haven't got already. So I have this concept of buckets. And the buckets are all the different lenses that you need to gather across the particular organization type that you're going to, or the part of the organization, the domain within the organization, and these buckets slowly fill. And so you can see if regulation hasn't filled at all, then you haven't had enough conversation about regulation. And so it's guiding that. Why? Because as it starts to fill those buckets, we know at the end we have enough data points in to go and to do the valid analysis. And it's really getting these 5 ways. I talk about 5 ways to hear the truth. You need customer evidence. You need at the desk, what people are really feeling that probably will never be invited into an executive workshop. You need the historical data. You need the snapshot of the psyche, the questionnaires that we want to send to people that tell them, it gives you a real truth into, an anonymous truth into how, the executive minus 1 and 2 might think in an organization, without declaring it, their names. And then you've got the live workshop. And those 5 sets of data gives you what I consider to be a position of truth within the organization that maybe others don't see.
And so is it then designed as a sort of transformation tool that basically the board would be using? It's like the C-suite is using this to reframe or redesign the organization. But can it also then be used like operationally, like day to day, for day-to-day decision making,
Both. So there are 2 tracks within the platform. I should say the platform is multi-tenant as well, so anyone can use it, and it's available now. But the platform has two tracks. One is a domain track, and one is an enterprise tracks. If you go down the enterprise, so recently I was in a UK company who have they do wellness type solutions, corporate wellness solutions. So they have a couple of thousand practitioners who give counseling to people, and then you have patients that belong to the client. And they wanted to do an end-to-end view of their EAP and to say, well, actually, we want to redesign everything that we do. Can we use the Dream Workshop to help capture our thinking today, capture our vision, and do exactly what I said, understand the constraints, and then build out the future? So we did that. I've got an opportunity that I'm working with at the moment in Oman to do something similar, but they're a training organization and they want to become a lifelong learning training organization. So it starts with a vision about where they want. So those are the domain, those are the enterprise ones. But then equally, I have a couple that are purely around contact center, the domain within a contact center. But you could narrow that down further to say, actually, what I want to think about is purely just AI. How does my business work with AI? I've got a cultural issue at the moment. I can't get it adopted. So being able to do the discovery and then analyze and then say, well, how do we use and how do we think about AI, which is obviously a big part of my business anyway. Dream helps us to get to that point. But then you've also got the other side of it, which is go to market, which is actually I want to grow and I want a growth agenda. So it can be applied into that domain very well as well.
Okay. And I mean, because you said that about using it inside the contact center environment, and I'm just thinking of like the holy grail for a lot of CX executives is root cause analysis. Can we stop people calling and complaining before it ever happens? I mean, can it do that kind of thing? I mean, can it sort of connect problems back to the cause and then advise on how you reduce call volume, for example?
That's exactly what it does.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what it does. So you can't. One of the fallacies about AI at the moment is that some people seem to think it can replace intelligence, and it can't replace intelligence. It can augment intelligence. But you need intelligent people to be able to use AI, right? I mean, it's not an easy thing to use. And so going into these workshops, the facilitators can't be my 12-year-old son. It has to be someone who really understands the domain, because you have to be able to ask the right questions for the knowledge to be onboarded into the platform, and that's critical. So it's not there to automate intelligence for an organization, but it's there to provide decision intelligence to allow people to see what they can do. And what it will do very well is analyze and identify root problems within a business based on the data that it's fed. And so one of those would be, and there is within the discovery section, for example, once you've created the discovery information and you've loaded it up with everything historical and current, there's a literally an agentic GPT there, like a chatbot in some parlance. I don't use that term particularly, but you can literally, it sits on top of the knowledge and you can ask it any question. So if you wanted to say, I want to get to the root cause of XYZ, you ask it and it will give you an answer. It will tell you what's going on. And that ability to be able to have these agentic agents go off, analyze the data and come back. In the old days, that used to be a data science type exercise. Nowadays, if you have the right approach in the platform and you train the agents correctly, the platform will do it.
Yeah. So if I notice for some reason, 50% of my calls today have come in from Birmingham, for example, I can actually ask it, like, is there a connection? Why are the calls only coming in from one city, or some other sort of correlation?
So you can do that. You could also, in that case, go externally and ask external sources if there's been any overriding thing within Birmingham that maybe has contributed to that. But you can also look within the contact center. There's lots of trend data within contact centers that a lot of organizations are nowhere near. And so, when you start to see agents not arriving in work, is there a cultural issue? Is there something that's happened within the location they're from? So you can start to identify where you have issues with certain cohorts, and from the capture information, imagine going to 1,000 people in your organization tomorrow with a 15-minute agentic conversation that everyone does, and it will guide them through the answers they need to give. And the first, let's say there's 5 lenses. The first question is always the same, on the basis of from 1 to 5, 1 being this, 5 being this. Tell me what you think. And then the next one is where you think you are today. The next question would be, where do you want to be today? Where do you think the company should be today? And then if you do nothing, where do you think it will be? That's quite an interesting data point, right? And then you have a series of questions that it asks against each of those. And by the end of it, you have a snapshot that says, and it's really interesting when I do it in AI, you see the executive, it always comes out the same. Executive, very warm about AI. They want to see AI adopted across their business. Operations, they're fairly neutral. But you get down to an agent level, it's glowing red, they hate it. And so there's a huge issue with adoption of AI, and actually having people use it. And so much like if you remember the old days of channel shift, how do I get someone to go and use digital? And often it was force their hand.
Yeah.
And so, it starts to help companies think about, well, how do I get people to adopt AI? Well, you get people to adopt AI by not making it a threat, and by giving it something that actually empowers them and making them part of the journey, not part of the end game of getting rid of, because that's the way it's approached by so many organizations. And it starts to give you that insight into how people think, then help you to say, well, if you look at a combi analysis on that, then it helps me to understand the psyche of my organization. Therefore, I can do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting to make that point then, that there's also a lot of culture involved here, in transformation itself. It's like, I mean, as you were speaking, I was just thinking about an organization I know that they did sort of NPS for the employees. So, every week on Monday morning, you'd have to answer how you're feeling about the company and working there. But when people responded negatively, nothing ever changed. So it was like it was a pointless exercise, because if people report dissatisfaction with the direction of the company, nobody ever responded and said, "Okay, let's sit down and work out what's going wrong."
And you and I have worked in contact centers long enough now to know that often, a lot of contact centers, as much as people talk about things like servant leadership, a lot of them are still very tower led. They're still, hit these KPIs or else. And as much as people say they're not, that they are.
Yeah.
I was in an organization not long ago where NPS was the be all and end all. Why? It doesn't mean anything. It's any more than CSAT does, really. But what really does matter is the mindset of our people. The how do they come to work, what's motivating them, what's their capability, what's the opportunity they've got in the business. And that's where things like combi analysis becomes quite powerful, because it allows you then to make that, and there's only one lens on it, but what it does is allow you to see the motivations within the organization and within the teams and the cohorts. And then you can start to say, well, actually, my attrition's gone up quite high here, or my unforced absence has gone up quite high here. Why? And you can start to correlate, well, actually, this, and actually often it can point back to an individual even. That says, well, the person running that team is clearly not what they say they should be, and that analysis can start to be addressed at that point.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, looking ahead then, from what you've been saying, it sounds almost like Dream and similar agentic products will eventually kind of evolve into a kind of nervous system for the enterprise that I guess it can continuously be monitoring customer sentiment, but also employee sentiment as well. And, are we going to start seeing that transformation becomes something that's almost kind of continuous then?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's a bigger question. So my view outside of Dream, I think Dream will do what it does. I think it gives you a point in time and the dashboard that you could keep feeding if you wanted to. You could keep doing 6 monthly, 15-minute interviews with the whole of your business to keep that snapshot turning over. The question about what people do with it is wholly different. And I think that we're moving to a point where, like it or not, the way that knowledge is understood and organized in a company is going to radically change. And the companies that are going to win are where knowledge is more centralized within an agentic framework, and analyzed much the way I'm talking about Dream at the moment. And my vision and what I'm working on behind this is very much thinking about, for a contact center, how do you capture that knowledge centrally within a contact center, be it the SOP or anything to do with culture and IQ, EQ, AQ, and start to think about how to deliver the right information to the right place. Because if I have something that contains all of the knowledge, then I can execute every workflow going. And more than that, I can give a team leader everything they need to manage their team. I can give an agent everything they need to assist them, because that's what everyone does. But that to me is a very basic level of AI. I can give my customers everything they need and far more, but I can also give my quality team every readout that they need because I have all the knowledge. I can give my training team everything that they need. I can drop 60-second trainings out to my agents without any interaction with training, because the agentic agent is able to identify training needs and do something about it. The insights that start to drive things, I can do dynamic WFM because I understand the call flows, and suddenly I don't need a WFM tool at all. Their history in my book, because what I care about with WFM is probably adherence, understanding why someone didn't turn up, did they have a sick note, all these types of things, and how that links into finance. Should I pay them or shouldn't I pay them? Everything like that, it's all done within the agentic platform. You don't need WFM tools to do that, because the reality on WFM and CRM and CCAS is you probably use about 10%, 20% of it regularly, and the rest of it you probably don't need. And I think that what will become more important is actually having agentic sit alongside people and alongside operations to not take over, but to allow organizations to start to think about how they embed workflow differently across the two.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, just to wrap up then, what are the blockers? I mean, what stops people from exploring this? Off the top of my head, I can immediately see that what you're talking about requires a reconstruction of the way data is organized inside most organizations. So, is that a problem? Is that going to be a problem? I mean, will people sort of look at this and say that would be great, but
Well, not for Dream. Dream can take data as it is and it will classify it and it will do its own thing. So not for Dream, no. But the bigger picture that I just painted, yes, it's a reorg, but they've got no choice. It's going there, and the thing is, the ones that will win are the ones that get there quickest. And it's a fact that it's going there. But data, I don't believe, and I stand to be challenged on this, and I am regularly, but I've not yet come across a point where I think data is the inhibitor. I think we talk a lot about data like it's the real challenge, but actually I don't believe that's the case. And I think I see that as a constraint to be worked around. I was in a company not long before Christmas. They've got 20,000 internal staff facing out to all their external markets, and they have a roster platform that they're not going to complete the new roster platform until 2030 something, which I think is absolutely horrendous. To me, we could build that within 12 months and it would be out. I live in an AI world. There is no excuse now for something to take that amount of time. So I don't think data is a constraint. Do I have to work with it and work around it? Yes, and that will take time. But we're talking months here, not years. That whole concept has gone now.
Right, Andrew, that's great. So we've covered a lot of ground. What's coming up this year then?
More dreaming. I think I've become the dream guy. There was one company asked if they could see the dream guy, which I thought was quite funny. But I think that companies need this. They need to be able to get around the noise and just think clearly about what they're trying to achieve. And even a BPO I'm talking to at the moment, one of the statements that came out was, well, we could use this across our organization as well as our customers, couldn't we? And the value was clear to them that actually being able to look into their business and have a psyche evaluation is super powerful.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week. Okay, great. Again.